Andy and dressed in a costume, and I'd have had more folks here, but I'll tell you, I've had an interesting week. The biggest challenge of getting up here and speaking, as anybody gets up here speaking can tell you, is picking your topic. Sometimes I've been listening back there, going back to pews, and Brother Carl will say something, I'm like, man, I've got to chase that rabbit. And I'll write it down, and I'll look forward to that sermon, and that's what I'll preach on when I get the opportunity, and I had one of those in my pocket I've been wanting to use. Sometimes I sort of stumped, I just opened my Bible up, and whenever I turn to it, that's how I end up preaching on Haggai, one of those Old Testament prophets. I think God put those in the middle, so we'll talk on them when we don't know what else to say. And then sometimes I preach the sermon that I need to hear myself. The last Sunday morning that I preached, that's what I did. I picked the sermon that I thought Adam needed to hear the most. And then on a rare occasion, you do all that planning and you just have another one land in your lap. And the sermon I'm going to give you today is one that just absolutely landed on my lap from the way this week is going, and I just feel this is the one I have to preach. The title is What I Learned from a Funeral. That C word, that dreaded cancer. It has hit my family hard this year. I've got a half sister. She lost her mother this past week after a 5-year battle with cancer. And I've got an Uncle Gary who's been on the prayer list for a while. I know a while back we said he was doing a whole lot better. Well, now he's taking a turn for the worse, and he's doing a whole lot worse again. So keep my Uncle Gary in your prayers. And then Adam York. This is Sarah's cousin. He's in his 30s. I remember him being in high school when me and Sarah got married. Terrific young man. He's got a terrific wife, Erica, and 2 beautiful little girls. And he was put on hospice this week with cancer. So definitely keep the York family in your prayers. It's been a rough week this week. But talk about what I learned from a funeral. My sister called me up and told me that her mom had passed away. And of course, I went to the funeral, and then she asked me if I'd be a pallbearer there because they were short-staffed, and I graciously agreed to do that. And so it's been on my mind this week. First lesson I learned, meant for that to come up in 2 pieces, but I guess it came up in one there. Faithfulness is more important than appearance. You know, we were driving, if you know where Loretta's at, that's where the funeral was at, and out near Waynesboro, out off 64 Highway, out near the Trace, where the cemetery was at. And as we're driving out there, several cars passed the funeral procession. How little class do you have to have on a 4-lane highway and pass a funeral procession? Some people just have no thoughts, no consideration whatsoever. We got on there at 64, and I saw the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. A construction zone that actually had construction workers in it. And here these construction workers, they're out there working, and as we drove by, every one of them turned, took their hard hat off, and stood there quietly as we drove by. And then we got there right before the cemetery, and there was this guy. He looked like a vagabond. I know absolutely nothing about him. He was an old man. He had unkempt hair and unkempt beard, big jacket that was too warm for the day. Was carrying a bag of something. I don't know what it was. And you know, as we drove by here, this fellow looked like a vagabond. Took his hat off, put his hat over his heart, and bowed his head. And here these people driving these nice cars in town had so much less class than this guy that looked like a vagabond. Faithfulness is more important than appearance. If we look at Luke chapter 18, verses 9 through 14, I think we all know this story. Also, he spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. You ever met somebody like that? Somebody said, "Oh, I'm so good. I'm better than you." You ever met somebody like that? You know somebody like that? Jesus is going to teach a parable about those people. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. Who were these 2 men? You've got a Pharisee, right? Who were the Pharisees? They were the guys that in their time that knew the Bible the best. They were the most devout. They were the most religious. That was as religious and righteous as you could get. And who's a tax collector? At this point in time, the Jews were controlled by the Romans, and the Jews didn't like the Romans very much. But then there was these certain Jewish people who went and worked for the Roman government. And they collected taxes for the Roman government. Can you imagine somebody more despised than the guy that's making you pay for the people to occupy your land that you don't want to be there? There's nobody more despised than a tax collector. Well, these two men went to the temple to pray. The Pharisee stood up and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess. You ever heard that prayer? You ever prayed that prayer yourself? Oh, I'm so glad I'm not like those other guys. That didn't do him any good at all, did it? What was the tax collector's prayer? And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you that this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. What did that tax collector pray? Be merciful to me, a sinner. He realized there were things wrong in his life. And he realized because there were things wrong in his life, he needed God. And without God, he couldn't solve those problems that were wrong in his life. But what happened to that man? He was justified when he went home. God heard his prayer. God listened to that man with his humble heart. And I think of those people that you look and you see, rough and tumble construction workers, and this fellow looks like a vagabond. They're showing class, and they're showing dignity. The next one, suffering can be a blessing. Sort of interesting. I've known Doris pretty well all my life. And I've pretty much only saw her birthday parties for my nieces and my nephew, and known all that family for a long time. But so you go to the visitation there. I don't know if you've been to the funeral home in Loretto. They've got a big room downstairs. And if it was in a church building, you'd call it the fellowship hall. They've got all these tables set up. They've got a table set up for food, and they've got vending machines there. And there's all these people from the church where she attended that have brought food. And the folks I didn't know, you always go, hey, how did you know so-and-so, or how are you related? And it was funny because I only asked the people I didn't recognize, which meant I only asked people that went to church with them. And every one of them said, oh, I go to church with them. Let me tell you an awesome story about the awesome Christian example they were in my life. I've known Doris for a long time. Her and her husband Andy were very worldly people. When they were younger, they did a lot of things that you might not ought to do. And you know what? Shortly before she got sick, she realized there was something wrong with her life. She started going to church. And the preacher stood up when he gave his sermon he talked about, he remembered how when he baptized them and how faithful they were and how she might have only had 5 years as a faithful Christian. What a blessing those 5 years were. I think of a young lady I went to church with when I was in high school named Christy. And she got cancer and she was sick. And you know what? She did more mission work and she touched more people's lives because of that illness. You know people like that? I know lots of people like that. I know some friends of ours, they have a young boy named Levi that passed away from cancer. And you know what? There's fundraisers all over this country in his honor because of the work they did. You want to see some really good car shows? I promise you there's a car show going on somewhere in his honor, his name, raising funds to take care of other kids in that condition. Some people take suffering and hardship and make it a blessing. In 2 Corinthians 11, 23 through 28, they are ministers of Christ. I speak as a fool, I am more. In labors more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prison more frequently, in deaths often. For the Jews 5 times I received 40 stripes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. At night and day I've been in the deep, in journeys often, in perils of water, in perils of robbers, in perils of my own countrymen, in perils of the Gentiles, in perils of the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and in toil, in sleepiness, often in hunger and thirst, in fasting often, in cold and nakedness. Beside the other things, what comes to me upon me daily, my deep concern for all the churches. Man, all the stuff Paul suffered, all the stuff that Paul went through. And what did he say at this time? In my deep concern for all the churches. This is what came about. I think of being at that funeral this weekend and talking to people and saying, they got sick. And then while they were sick, they did everything they could to help the people to church with them. They did it. So many stories I heard about blessings because of that. You think back to Paul, mentioned that he was shipwrecked 3 times. You remember some of those stories. We're on his 4th missionary journey. I know we call it a missionary journey. It's more like he was taken as a prisoner to Rome, but it's listed as his 4th missionary journey. He was shipwrecked on the way to Rome. And what happened when that storm came about on that ship? What did Paul tell them? If y'all believe, if y'all listen to me, no one's going to die. No one's going to get injured. We're all going to make it safely. Ship's going to be a total loss. We're going to lose everything, physically or possessions. But we're going to get through this. What happened? Ship broke up on the rocks. Everybody made it to shore. In the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, on a stormy night, everybody made it to shore. How? How in the world did a ship break up in a storm on rocks and everybody made it to shore? I bet everybody couldn't even swim. How much preaching was Paul able to do to those sailors because something bad happened to them on the water? How many centurions did Paul preach to because he was in prison? You think of the different people that we read through Acts and the different stories of conversions. One of them was a jailer. Why was the jailer able to be converted to Christ? Why did the jailer come to Christ? Because Paul was put in prison. Had they not been put in prison, that jailer wouldn't have been saved. Had something bad not happened to the apostles, something good would have come out of it. And here Paul's telling us all of these struggles and all of this suffering that he went through, my deep concern for all the churches. That's what he was worried about. During all those times, he was worried about his brethren, his brothers and sisters throughout Asia and Europe and throughout the Promised Land. That's what he was worried about. And we see there's some people take these bad events in their lives and they go and they don't do anything with it. I know my Uncle Gary, love him to death, but he's a sit-at-home and fester kind of guy when things aren't going his way. And here other people I know, and they get really sick. And what do they do when they're really sick? They go help other people. They take that opportunity to minister to other people. Because you know what? Somebody else has got it worse than they do. Think of these people that are going through hard times and they go out and they help other people. What's the second thing I learned this week? Suffering can be a blessing. You think of telling the story about how when the preacher got up, he preached a lesson on the young lady, or I guess she wasn't a young lady, she'd been suffering for many years, but the lady went up and she just wanted to touch Jesus' cloak to be healed. Had Doris died quickly, she wouldn't have had the opportunity to come to Christ. She was given that opportunity, and then she lived 5 years past the doctor said, and it was a blessing to lots of people's lives. Some people aren't lucky like that, right? You don't think about suffering being lucky. We think about, Adam, he was in that car accident a couple weeks ago. You know, he's lucky to be alive, but a lot of people don't survive those car accidents. Think about the people that they're perfectly healthy one day and the next day they're gone. Yeah, cancer is a terrible, terrible, horrible thing. But how much would you give to be given firmly, hey, you've got this many years to live? You know how much you can set straight in your life if you know your time? We don't know when Christ is coming back, do we? We don't know when we have. We should all live that way. You think of the country song where he sings about, you know, all the different things he did because he found out he was dying. He rode a bull and he went skydiving because he knew it was time. So how many things could you do? You know, in that song it says fishing wasn't such an imposition. You think of all the stuff you want to do and the stuff you dedicate your time to, none of that stuff became important anymore, did it? Really important things happened. You know, I think of watching football on Saturday afternoon. I always enjoy doing that. Sometimes there's things more important than that, isn't there? I think of activities I enjoy doing. Wouldn't it be great if we all actually focused on things that mattered instead of things that didn't matter? It's awful hard to do. Well, sometimes suffering allows us a clarity of vision that will allow us to do that. Then the last point I want to make, or the last thing I learned is, like I said, I've known them for a long time. They were worldly people most of their life, and then here at the end, they found Christ. Here at the end, you know, the preacher talked about remembering baptizing them, and it made me think of this girl. I know they talked about that woman with the bleeding, but it made me think of this parable. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyards. Now when he had agreed with the laborers for a denarius a day, he sent them into the vineyard, and he went out about in the third hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, you also go into the vineyard, and whatever is right I will give you. So they went. Again he went out about the 6th, then the 9th, and did likewise. And about the 11th hour he went out and found others standing idle, and said to them, why have you been standing here idle all day? You know what's going to happen in this world, right? They're all going to get the same reward. Some people are fortunate and they come to Christ really early in life. I think of the young boys in the congregation here. Every time we have a singing, you know, Seth and Levi get up here and lead a song. I think about them doing prayers and think of all those kids upstairs in the Bible school classes, and they've learned these stories since they were in diapers. Some people, because of the blessings in their life, got to come to Christ early. And they're the ones that got there first thing in the morning. And then other people find out later on in life. And then some people find Christ at that 11th hour. It's okay to find Christ at the 11th hour, but we better not find him at the 13th. Isn't that the challenge? It's nothing more dangerous than waiting. Because what happens if you wait 1 minute too long? And here, the reward is the same for all. So when evening had come, the owner of the vineyard said to his stewards, call the laborers and give them their wages, beginning with the last to the first. And those who were hired about the 11th hour, each received a denarius. How much did he promise all the poor laborers? A denarius. Our reward is the same. It doesn't matter if we came to Christ when we were a young adult, when we first hit that age of accountability, we realized we needed to make ourselves right and we came to Christ then, or if we came to Christ when we were 99 years old. The reward is the same. Now there's a lot of blessings in living a Christian life. You think of, I went to the funeral this weekend. You ever been to a funeral for somebody that was unfaithful? Somebody that was worldly? Somebody that was an atheist or an agnostic? There's a lot of crying and weeping and sorrow. Everybody's all super upset. You ever been to a funeral for someone that was a faithful Christian? Is there a difference? If you go to a funeral for a faithful Christian, there's usually people laughing, telling stories about one another, enjoying and celebrating the fact that because that person was a Christian, they're now a whole lot better off. I talked about suffering with a horrible disease for many years, and you may not be physically cured of that illness, but once you're with God, you're spiritually cured of that illness. How much better? I don't care how good your life is here on earth. You could be the happiest person in the world. You could be the richest person in the world. You could have all the blessings in the world. You think of in Bible class we talk about all the blessings that were bestowed upon Abram before he became Abraham. And his blessings, it doesn't matter how blessed you are here on earth. Heaven's going to be an improvement. Heaven's going to be better. It doesn't matter how great we have it. But the flip side of that is, when it's really, really bad, heaven is a blessing. What an awesome reward. But when the first came, they supposed that they would receive more, and they likewise received each a denarius. Some people have blessings and get mad at other people getting blessings too and don't handle it well. And when they had received it, they complained against the landowner, saying, "These last men have worked only an hour, and you have made them equals to us, who have borne the burden and the heat of the day." Why did they complain? Why were they all upset? Exactly what they agreed to work for. I'm working at a plant that's about to shut down here. Sort of fun. The last year I've been setting up the Mexico plant and making sure all their systems work and that they're ready to start producing cars. And poof, now my plant's closing, so all the work to be done at the Mexico plant I just helped set up. So, they got the severance package for the employees, and it's based on how long you've been there. So the people that started this year don't get much, but the people like me, I've been there a long time. If you look on the windshield of my car, my parking pass says number 8. Been there a long time. I get a much better severance package. I get quite a few more weeks of pay than some of those people that started. That's not the way heaven is. That's not the way a reward in heaven is. But because you've been a Christian a long time, doesn't mean you get a better heaven than somebody that's been a Christian for 5 minutes. But here this guy that had been out there working all day, he was upset. He thought he should get a better deal than what he agreed to. You ever have that where you agree to do something and everybody agrees on the price, and then it comes out and they're upset about the deal at the end? Friend, am I doing you no wrong? Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what is yours and go your way. I wish to give the last man the same as you. You've been given the reward. You've been given the reward you agreed to. Why are you upset that someone else got it as well? Sort of an interesting story. If we're those 11th hour workers, what a happy ending we get. And should be a happy ending for those first hour workers too, shouldn't it? But sometimes people don't take it well. There's a fellow I mentioned a lot when I preach. Anytime I think of sinful people coming to Christ, I always think of a preacher I know up in Manchester, Tennessee area. He was a pretty terrible person, did some pretty terrible things, was all into drugs, all into all this stuff. He's got tattoos all over his body. You look at him, he's a scary looking dude. And a funny thing happened. He came to Christ. And he was baptized. And he changed his life. And he became a preacher. And wow, what an awesome preacher he is. You want to have somebody give a sermon on the hardships that sin can cause you? I mean, he knows what those hardships are. He can do a phenomenal job. There's lots of people like that. So some people grew up in the church all their life, and some people came to it later. And I think it's neat that because we all come from different backgrounds, it allows us to reach different people, doesn't it? There's people that are easier to reach than others. I have some friends at Madison that they were both Catholic, and they both grew up staunchly Catholic, and they joined the church, and they reach Catholics really well, a whole lot better than I could. They may not reach other people as well as I can, but you think of the preachers that we have that come. There's one particular preacher that we have that comes to talk to us, and he's a preacher that comes to talk to us because Richard talked to him first. Our goal, if we're up there in that first hour group, or that second hour group, or third hour group, our goal as Christians should be to get as many 11th hour workers as we can into that vineyard, isn't it? Our goal should be, we shouldn't be upset that people get a reward that's the same as ours. We should be happy that they get a reward that's the same as ours. We should strive with everything we have to get as many of those folks to come to Christ as we possibly could. Like I said, it's been a challenging, interesting week. But here I've known somebody my whole life that was a worldly person, and at the very end came to know Christ. And because they came to know Christ at the end, they've got the same reward that everybody that's been in Christ the whole time has. And then get to meet people that I've never met before, tell me stories of, wow, what an awesome Christian example is. That's the same person I knew. Yeah, it's the same person I knew. It's the same person I knew that realized there was something wrong in their life, and they came to Christ. And because they came to Christ, and because they changed their life, they were able to be a blessing to others. Are we blessings to others? Maybe that's the lesson we need to learn. Are we complacent here? I've been a Christian many, many years. I've been a Christian since I was in middle school. I grew up with a huge youth group. We went to all the church functions. That first song, Danny Flynn, I absolutely love that song. It always takes me back to high school and those youth retreats. Am I complacent? Do I do as much to reach people as those new converts do? We know a lot of those people. I got a buddy of mine, Shane. He was living a worldly life. Him and his girlfriend were living together. They weren't married, and they were doing stuff they shouldn't do. And one day, him and his wife, or fiance at the time, decided, they needed to do something. They were doing what's wrong. They were living a bad lifestyle. Things in their life weren't right. And they had the most interesting day ever. They went and got married. On the same day they got married, they got baptized. And the next week he went to preaching school. And if you're ever in North Georgia, you get to hear Shane preach. Shane's a phenomenal preacher. Love him to death. Why is he a phenomenal preacher? Because he takes the stuff that he learned and he wants to share it with other people, because he wasn't a very nice guy, but God saved him. He might not have been the greatest guy in the world, but Jesus loved him. Jesus died for him. And he wants everybody else to know. It doesn't matter how bad you are. Jesus died for you. It doesn't matter how good you are. Jesus died for you as well. There's no, we think of, all sin is sin. There's no sin that's worse than other sins in God's eyes. And God died for all of us. Think of David, the man's after God's own heart, was an adulterer and a murderer. Here you think of Moses, he killed a man as well. It doesn't matter how bad you are or how far away from God you are. If you come to Christ and you put on Christ through baptism, you get a new life. It's all washed away. And it doesn't matter if it's that first hour in the morning or the 11th hour in the story. You're going to get the same reward of heaven. You're going to get the same reward of an eternal life with God as everyone else that made that same decision. I would encourage you tonight, if you haven't put on Christ, to do that. We don't know when it's too late. You know, you think of the young man that was in the car accident last week. I've got a young lady that I knew when I was growing up that she lost her little sister. They left church one Sunday morning, were going to grandma's house and got hit by a drunk driver. Who would think you'd get hit by a drunk driver Sunday afternoon? We don't know how much longer we have. It might be tomorrow. It might be 100 years from now. You know, we might all live to be 120. We might have a lot of time left, but we don't know. And is it really worth gambling when you don't know? If you haven't put on Christ, I would encourage you to do so. If there's anything you need, if you've put on Christ but have been living poorly and haven't been doing what you needed to do, I would encourage you to come and ask for prayers of the congregation. One of our kind and loving elders would gladly pray with you, and I know that the congregation would love to pray with you and help encourage you and to give you any help that you need. I would encourage you to come.